Hello, Steve, Canadian Sasquatch, coming at you with week 9 of the Meadology series. Holy crap, we did it! Cheers to all of you for watching. And yes, here we are drinking the mead we made in week 1. So I did a little bit of previous videoing about all that, so let's cut to that right now. So there it is, week 9, the Joe's Ancient Orange. You can see the fruit has mostly fallen. There's a little bit of raisins up here. Let's slowly turn it around here. Got an orange spill up here, but that's fine. That's fine. It is looking pretty good. But you know what will make it look even better? In the glass. Alright, so the first thing we gotta do, I'm gonna take this guy off. The balloon is done. Done. Next thing we're gonna do is do it this way. Yeah. Yep, some raisins are going in. That's fine. Absolutely fine. And a second glass. Because you gotta pay the mead tax. There you go. Just a slight haze to it. So there we have it. I do have the raisins in there. That is fine. So let's give it a sniff. It smells yummy. Get a little bit of the cinnamon, a little bit of the clove, a little bit of the honey. So we're gonna dive right in and cheers, everybody. Yes, that is very tasty. You do get the orange and the bitter from the pith and the peel, but you also have the sweetness from the honey coming through, along with a little bit of the alcohol and the clove combining to give you like a little methanol thing happening in the back of your mouth. It's probably a nice medium full body. Yep, that is very, very drinkable in just 9 weeks. What I will probably do now is I will probably pour that off into another container just to get the fruit out of it. And then I'll probably let it sit for a week or 2 and then bottle. But as you can see, you don't have to bottle it. You can drink it as is right now. Just put some sort of stopper on top, and anytime you want some, just go ahead and pour you a glass or stick a straw in there and just drink it through a straw. There you have Joe's Ancient Orange Mead in 9 weeks. And yeah, while you guys were watching that, I did fill up my glass a bit more because it is dang tasty. So yeah, 9 weeks, that's all it takes to make a nice glass of mead, or a gallon of mead, or whatever size you wish to make. And with that, let's get into our Q&A. I've got quite a few good questions going on here. They're on my laptop down here, so I will be reading them and answering them. Trying to give credit to where credit is due on some of them. So, like, question number 1, Clint, on my week 2 video, asked about when to add honey for a braggot. So if you don't know, a braggot is where you basically make a beer and a mead together. So it's both honey and grains. When I typically do it, I typically measure out the honey into my fermentation bucket, and then I dump the cooled wort on top of the honey, because usually at that time the wort is still in the 90 to 100 degrees, because it's really hard to cool wort in Texas because our groundwater is warm. So that's typically when I do it, and then I mix it up and it's good to go. Some people do it by adding it to secondary. Doing it that way, you will get a little bit more of the honey aromas and flavors, because the first fermentation is usually the most vigorous one, but then you're adding honey, which kicks up the yeast again. So you do end up with a little better aroma and honey flavor doing it that way. And then other people, what they do is they brew a beer, they brew a mead, and then they blend the two of them to make their braggot. That's not the typical way of doing it. It's more of a modern way. Typically, it is having the honey mixed in with the fermenting beer at the same time. But as long as it tastes good, there is no wrong way to do it. I like to do it up front because I don't want to have to worry about trying to measure out however much honey I'm going to be using into a full bucket already, because most scales that I use can't handle that much weight to measure it out correctly. So that's essentially why I do it that way. Just in the primary, honey first, then the wort, mix it up, then I'm good to go. And that's pretty much, hopefully that helps out with that. Question number 2, Greedy Dragon Brewing, fellow Canadian. He asked on week 1 about doing the Joes. Cheers, Greedy. Asked about if using the balloon is safe for an airlock. And yes, once you've sanitized the balloon, then it's sanitized, and you put it on top of the jug, and it's good to go, because it's going to be pushing CO2 out, meaning nothing can get into it because all the pressure is pushing out. And then after it's done, like we just saw when I took the balloon off, it was limp, but it still had CO2 in it, just enough pressure to keep things from trying to get into the holes that we punctured into the balloon back on week 1. So it's a very safe way if you don't have a proper airlock with water or anything like that. Using a balloon is perfectly fine. There's no way for anything to get inside. So thanks, Greedy, for that question. KM12, he's been super active throughout this series, so a lot of the questions are actually from him, which is great. And he asked on week 2 about more info on the flavors of the honey varietal. So week 2, I was talking about the honey, and I went through the different varietals that I happen to have on hand, and he basically just wanted more information on what they smelled like and tasted like. I could do another video based on that. If anybody else would be interested in me doing that, let me know down in the comments, and I will do a week 10 where I go into more details about the varietals of honey and try to gather up several different varieties that we can go through, and I can do aromas and flavors and all that with those. So yeah, let me know down in the comments, and I'll put one of those videos up there. Week 3, so that was a yeast week. Clint once again asked, do I carbonate my braggots? So I have tried to carbonate my brackets, but so far I have failed at carbonating them. My very first one, it's coming up on 3 years, and it's just now starting to be slightly carbonated. My problem is I usually hit the limits of the yeast. So I don't, the alcohol limits of the yeast. So it's hard for them to push through and eat any more sugars that I add to them because they've already hit their limits. We can typically fix that by using EC 1118, and I tried doing that with my last one, but again, that didn't work out because it was already at a 14%, and even though EC's limit is 18 to 20%, it was jumping right into a very hostile environment for the yeast. So for that to work correctly, what I should have done was created a starter of the EC 1118, and this is what I'll be doing with my next batch, which is a rye wine braggot. So it's 100% rye malts mixed with mesquite honey. And when I go to attempt to carbonate that, what I will do is I will put the EC 1118 into a starter and just get that going really, really strong and vigorous, and use that as my carbonating. So the liquid that I use, I'll just put several drops into each of the bottles that I want carbonated, and it should carbonate up, should be enough to get going through the sugars that are in there, the solution that I've created, plus the little bit that's left in the braggot itself, to get itself to be carbonated. A much easier way is if you have a kegging system, you can force carbonate and then bottle off of that. I do not have a kegging system, so at this point, I just got to do it naturally and trying to get the yeast to do the work for me. So KM12 once again asks a great question on narrowing down the sweetness versus the honey versus the amount of ABV when choosing the honey and the yeast and all that, and how to make it all work together and all. The first one, it takes some playing around with. The first thing that you need to find out is what level of sweetness you prefer. Myself and my beautiful bride, we prefer them on the sweeter side of things, so about a final gravity of about 1020 is about where we really like it. So 1015 to 1025 in that ballpark is really quite nice for what we enjoy. So that's what I try to aim for. Then depending on the type of mead, I try to think about the ABV level. I typically go between the 10 and 16%, averaging around 12 for most things. But sometimes I want it a little bit lower, sometimes I want it a little bit higher. And based on that, I will choose the yeast that I want, like the KV 1116 for the higher ABV, the 71B for the lower ABV ones. Then to determine the amount of honey to do all this, I use a calculator. Gotmead.com has a great calculator for calculating out the ABV and the amount of honey and all that. And I'll post links to, all the links will be down in the description box that I talk about today. So with this tool, you plunk in the values, the volume that you want, the ABV or the amount of honey, and it does all the calculations for you. So you can get a ballpark figure of how much honey to how much ABV or vice versa. I'm just reading over my notes here. Yeah, the next thing is you'll want to find a yeast to hit that ABV. And like I said, the higher ABV, I go for the 1116. The lower ones, I go for the 71B. 1122. And sometimes I like to play around with different yeasts for different flavor profiles. So the RC212, that is also a higher ABV one. I believe that one goes up to 16%. The 1116, that's an 18%. 71B, 12% or so. So you just gotta play around with it. The more you play around with it, the more you get a feel for what they're capable of. Because they do say, like, the alcohol tolerance of the yeast is like 71B, that's 12 or 14%, I believe. But you can push that up to 16, 17%. It's not hard to do. It can happen quite accidental, so you do need to keep that in mind when you're doing it. Those numbers are typically for wines, and meads are a different animal because there's so much more sugar, and we do add nutrients to them that can get the yeast to go a little crazy and boost their ABV. So that's a great question there. So another good question from KM12 was on week 2. What do you do when you buy a 5-gallon bucket of honey that's crystallized? Quite simply, you just use a spoon, put it into your fermenter as you weigh it out, and then you just add some warm water to it, no more than 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you just mix the bejesus out of it. That's not something you need to worry about. Crystallized honey is sugar. If it doesn't get all mixed in, the yeast know what to do, and they will eat through the chunks of honey. Not a problem. On week 1, Chris Jimison asked, what is the OG and SG for the Joe's Ancient Orange Mead? I have no idea. I have never taken a gravity of Joe's Ancient Orange. There's never been a real need to, because it is extremely consistent with being done in 2 months. I've never had it carbonate. I've never had it overly sweet because it didn't finish out. It just very consistently, 2 months done. As long as you keep it at the right temperature, so in the like 70s or so. Outside of that, yeah, I have no idea. I have done a spirit indication test. I have a video on all that. I'll post a link to that right there down in the description as well. And that's essentially where you take a sample of the beverage that you want. You take a gravity reading of that, boil away half of it, bring it back up to volume with plain water, and then do another gravity, and then you do some math, and you get the ABV out of that. And I'll have a link down below as well to the Spirit Indication website. But my video also has all that information and how to do it, and takes you through the steps. So give that a check. Another question from KM12 is switching between sanitizers to prevent bugs, building immunity from one to the other. Some people like to do this. Personally, I don't think it's a big problem, especially with home brewers, because we're not all that consistent. Like maybe for somebody who's brewing like once a week, every week of the year type thing, they might have problems with it. Some of us, we don't brew that much. I don't think it's an issue. I do use 2 different ones, like I mentioned back in week 1. When I'm done with making something with wild yeast, then I'll wash it, and then I'll sanitize it with IDO4 and let that sit. And then once that's rinsed off, then when I go to use again, I'm using Star San again. And I have never had an issue with this. I know some people are just germ crazy, so it's like they flip like every other time, or once a year they switch different. I don't think at this point it's an issue. Star San is works great as a sanitizer for a sole solution. A lot of breweries, they only use one sanitizer because their equipment is built for only being able to sanitize things one way. Usually, if you have something like IDO4, then going through your system, then it's not really built for using something like Star San or their other 5 Stars other product, I can't remember. So yeah, it's you can do it if you want to be crazy, but I don't think it's an issue at all, especially with homebrewers, because we just, as long as you clean everything really well when you're done with it, and then sanitize it really well just before using it, you'll be good to go. Another question from KM12 was, how do I store large batches of Star San? I just use a 6.5 gallon PET carboy. And here's a picture of it. And that's basically how I do it. I have been doing it that way for several years now with no issues. It's not eating through the PET. It's not gotten cloudy on me because, as I mentioned, I use distilled water. It works just fine. The stuff that you see in that picture, that's been in there since January 1st. It is now almost middle of September, so not a problem. Another great question from KM12 on week 6 is to clarify when to stop degassing and stop oxygenating. Typically, I like to stop using oxygen, or oxygenating is at the second feed-in. We oxygenate the must because the yeast require oxygen to reproduce. And right around the second feeding, typically, they are no longer reproducing. They are just going gangbusters on eating everything. And once they start eating, they're no longer interested in reproducing. They've had their sex. They want their sandwich. That's essentially how it works. So yeah, right around the second feeding, I stop oxygenating. For degassing, typically I will stop degassing around the third feeding. But every time you rack something, you're degassing it because you're causing the must or meat at that point, to do some sort of work, and as it's being pushed through and whatever, it's giving off the CO2. So every time you rack, that's a degassing. But typically I don't use a spoon or a whisk or the drill power thing after the third feeding. If there's a bunch of stuff still in suspension, like a month down the road, then a little bit of degassing doesn't hurt because everything's in suspension, because CO2 is attached to it, which is keeping it in suspension. So you whip out some of that CO2 and things will settle down a little bit quicker. So another good question from KM12 here is for more information on stabilization. So this is where you take your beverage that is exactly where you want it and you stabilize it so it doesn't change. Or if you want to be able to back sweeten it. Either way, you need to use both potassium sorbate and potassium metabisulfite to do the job. The potassium sorbate essentially sterilizes the yeast so they can no longer reproduce. And then use the potassium metabisulfites to kill the yeast. And you have to use both of them, otherwise, as you're killing the yeast, they could reproduce more, and then there's not enough metabisulfites in the must to kill off the newborn yeast. So you have to use the combination of the two to make sure the yeast aren't reproducing and are dead. And then at that point, you are now stable, so you can back sweeten it without any worries. Also, if you want to store it a long time, like more than a year or two, then adding a little bit more potassium metabisulfites helps with that, because what that does is it, as we talked about, produces sulfur gas, which attaches essentially to the oxygen in the mead, and it pushes it out. So you have less chance of the mead becoming oxidized because the sulfur has pushed it out, which allows for a longer storage option. And this is what winemakers do when they produce their red wines that they want to store for 5-10 years. They put in a little bit extra sulfur into it to get that oxygen out so that it doesn't oxidize. Typically, I don't stabilize. I let the mead do its thing completely, and it stabilizes itself. But I have had this backfired, as you guys saw with my prickly pear, where it carbonated in the wrong kind of bottles. So, yeah, I should have stabilized or let it go out a little bit longer. So another question from KM12 is, where do I come up with my recipes? Well, I've always been quite handy in the kitchen because I just know how different flavors meld with other flavors. So I can just go into the kitchen, grab some spices out of the cabinet, and they just work together because I know this flavor profile works with this flavor profile, and they just go together. And I've been doing that with my beers and meads and all that with the same amount of success. I don't think I've had any beverages that I've made that I have not enjoyed when I've come up with my ideas. It's just something I grew up doing in the kitchen, at which point I just kind of learned the different flavor profiles of everything that I work with, and I just mix them together and gotten to the point where if I take something I've never tasted before, and I can then think of, okay, this will work well with these other things, and be able to combine them. And yeah, it works out. So it's essentially just a lot of practice, knowing the different flavors and aromas of different ingredients, and then thinking just off the top of my head is like, oh, you know what would be really good is, let's do a cardamom cinnamon mellow with apples. That would, so you'd have a cardamom cinnamon mellow sizer, and actually that sounds really good. I'd probably use use a mixture of honey, buckwheat and clover. So you have the brown sugar flavors from the buckwheat and the clover, and hey, it sounds like an apple pie mead right there. So hey, you guys can steal that one from me. So yeah, that was pretty much all the questions. So what now? I do have other videos, some that I've mentioned throughout the series that might be able to help push you guys along. One of my videos, my Braze 1 month mead, aka BOMM bomb. I invite you guys to go check that out. That's making a mead in 1 month instead of the Joe's, which takes 2 months. So cheers. I need another sip of this delicious thing. Oh, that's so good. Another video that I have that you might enjoy is me making my cranberry traditional. That one is a silent video though, so you will have to pay attention and watch to see the subtitles and all that I have going on in that. Another series that I had started but I never finished because I kind of forgot to video the latter parts of it, but when I was making one of my blood orange meads, I started a series and I went through a bunch of the stages and all that I did on that one. And then, as I mentioned before, spirit indication, which is pretty useful. It's how I determine the ABVs in my beverages, because I rarely take an original gravity. Usually because my original gravities are higher than my hydrometers or my refractometers will go. So there's no point in me even attempting to do that. So yeah, so give that one a gander as well. And so that's pretty much it. there's been some great feedback. New friends have been made through this series, which is always great. And I look forward to hearing your guys' adventures in mead making. Be sure to let me know how that all goes. If you have any other suggestions on what you'd like to see from me in the future, feel free to send me ideas over. Comment down below, send me a private message, whatever. I'm quite open to doing more videos and extending upon this series however we can. Kind of like the different flavors of the varietals of honey. Again, if you guys are interested in that, let me know down below and I will put together a video on that. And with that, my friends, we are concluding this Meadology series. 9 weeks. It has been a lot of fun. Please thumb up the videos. Please subscribe if you have not done so. I do hope to have quite a few more videos coming out along this educational stuff, hopefully, based on your guys' suggestions, based on stuff that I can think of as it comes up. Maybe I'll do a braggot series. There's been a couple questions about braggots. Maybe I'll do some beer stuff as well. It all depends on what you guys want. So yeah, please subscribe. I definitely will have more videos of some sorts. And with this mead we made 9 weeks ago, I say to you, be sure to have a pint of awesome, because I know I will. Cheers everybody, and thanks for watching.